I was standing in our childhood kitchen, peeling apples for the pie Mom used to make every Thanksgiving, when I heard it. My sister Margaret, whispering to her husband in the hallway, just loud enough to be overheard if you happened to be in the right place. Just like when we were kids, and she wanted me to hear something she could later deny. She doesn't need the house. She never had a family of her own. What's she going to do with 3 bedrooms and a garden? Her voice was laced with that blend of faux concern and cold strategy I'd learned to recognize decades ago. I stopped peeling. My hands tightened around the paring knife. She spent 3 years taking care of Mom, her husband said, barely audible. That counts for something. I waited. I hoped. Margaret's sigh cut through the silence. She chose to stay. Nobody forced her to give up her job. Besides, it's not like she was making much. The next sentence landed like a slap. We deserve something for all the flights, the stress, the time we lost. It's only fair. Fair. That word, twisted and weaponized, ricocheted through my bones. I'd buried our mother 6 days ago. I'd held her hand while she slipped away in the very bedroom she and Dad had shared for 40 years. I'd cooked every meal. Cleaned every sheet. Balanced every bill while our mother forgot how to use a fork, how to walk, how to say our names. Margaret had visited 4 times in 3 years. Once for an hour. Twice with a suitcase. Always leaving early. And now she was telling her husband that she deserved the house. I stayed in that kitchen for a long time after their voices faded down the hall. The apples turned brown on the counter, forgotten. The pie was never made. That evening, Margaret poured wine and smiled at me across the table like nothing had been said. She even called me heroic when one of the neighbors mentioned how well I'd taken care of Mom. She used words like grateful, and impressed, and so proud, all while knowing the will had already been changed. All while knowing the lawyer would call me in the morning with news that would gut me. It wasn't just the theft that shattered me. It was the pretending. The smooth, practiced ease with which Margaret stole what didn't belong to her, and still made me feel like I should thank her for being civil about it. I didn't argue that night. I didn't bring up what I'd heard. I didn't scream or throw anything. I simply smiled back. I'd been trained for this. Margaret had always played queen, I'd always played peacekeeper. But this time, something in me had shifted. Because this wasn't about furniture or money or even the house. It was about memory. Sacrifice. Legacy. And she had just tried to erase mine with a lawyer's pen and a few sentences whispered in the hallway. She thought she'd won. But she had no idea what I'd been preparing for the past 6 months. I never intended to come back home, not for good. After college, I'd carved out a modest but fulfilling life in Portland, small apartment, non-profit job, mismatched dishes, and enough solitude to feel like peace. I was content in the way people are when they've made peace with being overlooked. I never married. Never had kids. The kind of life people politely call independent and secretly call lonely. Then came the diagnosis. Early onset Alzheimer's. Mom was only 68. The call came from a neighbor, not Margaret. She was in Italy at the time, something about a food and wine tour she'd won through her husband's company. I remember the moment vividly. I was grocery shopping, staring at a jar of peanut butter, when my phone buzzed. She keeps wandering out barefoot, the neighbor said. She didn't know who I was today. I quit my job 2 weeks later. Packed my life into the back seat of a 10-year-old Toyota. I told myself it would just be temporary, maybe 6 months, until we got a routine in place. Until Margaret sorted out her work-from-home arrangements like she said she would. She never did. Those 6 months became a year, then 2, then 3. Caring for Mom wasn't noble, not like the movies make it seem. It was repetition. Routines. Diapers. Apologies. Endless loops of, "Where's your father?" and "Am I late for work?" It was holding a spoon to her mouth while pretending not to notice the tears streaming down her face. It was holding mine back when I changed the sheets at 3 a.m., because she thought the hallway was the bathroom. The days were quiet and exhausting. I'd cook meals she'd forget how to eat. I'd brush her hair while she watched a show she didn't recognize. She stopped calling me by name around year 2. Just, "that nice girl." Sometimes, "nurse." Once, heartbreakingly, "Mom." Margaret visited on holidays, when there were photos to be taken. She'd swoop in with flowers and scarves and stories about Spain or Napa or wherever she and Graham had just returned from. She'd charm the neighbors. Post a selfie with Mom, usually with a caption like, "Family is everything." Then she'd vanish again, leaving behind her perfume and a credit card receipt for organic wine, which I always paid. I couldn't remember the last time she washed a dish or changed a bandage. But I didn't resent it. Not at first. I told myself she had a life to maintain, a career to preserve, a marriage to protect. I convinced myself that what I was doing was temporary, that one day she'd come back, and we'd split things fairly. That she'd see what I'd done and thank me. I told myself that until the day I found the new will. It was buried in the desk drawer, behind a stack of old property tax statements. I wasn't snooping. I'd been trying to find a copy of Mom's insurance policy after a pipe burst under the kitchen sink. I unfolded the document casually, thinking it was the old will we drafted years ago. But this one was different. It was dated 8 months ago. And it was signed. Not by Mom's usual lawyer, but by one Margaret had found, online, and brought home during one of her 3-hour visits. Everything was left to Margaret. The house. The accounts. The belongings. There wasn't even a note about me. Not a line. Not a mention. I remember sitting there on the floor, the will in my lap, my hands trembling. I read it 3 times before I could believe it. I thought, for a moment, maybe it was a mistake. Maybe Mom hadn't understood. Maybe Margaret hadn't explained. But deep down, I knew. Margaret had always had a talent for rewriting history. When we were kids, she'd knock over a vase and blame me. When we were teens, she'd sneak out and swear I was the one who left the door unlocked. I'd cover for her, again and again, thinking that's what good sisters do. It was always easier to take the fall than to argue with Margaret. But this wasn't a vase. This wasn't a curfew. This was my mother's legacy. And it was my life, 3 years of it, written off as a footnote. I didn't confront her then. I told myself I'd wait. Wait until I had more information, until I understood what had really happened. I tucked the will back into the drawer and fixed the pipe myself. I washed my hands and made dinner like nothing had changed. But something had. That night, I wrote a list in my journal titled, "What They Forgot." 1. That I gave up my pension for this. 2. That I missed Sarah's wedding because Mom had a fall. 3. That I cleaned the floors on my hands and knees because Mom liked the smell of lemon soap. 4. That I paid for the groceries when Mom's card kept getting declined. 5. That I watched the woman who raised us dissolve, and stayed, even when she didn't know who I was. They forgot all of it. And Margaret had the nerve to say it was fair. That list became a plan. The reading of the will was held in a beige office on the 2nd floor of a low-rise building downtown, the kind of place with plastic plants and fluorescent lights that buzz slightly when no one's speaking. I sat across from Margaret at the long, too shiny table, flanked by her husband Graham and their real estate agent, a slick man in a plaid tie who introduced himself as, "just here to observe." He didn't say it, but he didn't need to. He was already measuring the square footage in his mind. The lawyer, a nervous man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, unfolded the document and cleared his throat. "This is the most recent will, signed and notarized 8 months ago." Margaret leaned forward slightly, the smile on her face pulled tight like fresh paint. Graham placed a hand on her knee, subtle but rehearsed. As per the terms of the document, the lawyer began, all assets, including the family home at 47, Hawthorne Lane, all associated property, remaining funds in the joint account ending in 2891, and all personal belongings, are to be transferred in full to Margaret Caldwell. Silence. Not even a pause. Not even a token phrase like, with gratitude to both daughters, or, in recognition of years of care. Nothing. My name didn't cross his lips. I waited, heart thudding, for someone to correct the oversight. I looked at Margaret. She avoided my eyes. "I'm sorry," I said quietly. "That's not the will Mom drafted with Mr. Leland. That version split the estate." The lawyer shifted uncomfortably. "Yes. That will was superseded. This one reflects new instructions." "What new instructions?" She couldn't even recognize the stove by that point. Margaret finally turned to me, her voice a practiced blend of sympathy and control. "Mom had clarity for stretches. You know that. And during one of those moments, she told me she wanted everything kept simple. She didn't want things divided. It would have been too messy. Too messy." I felt something cold unfold inside me. A long, slow burn rising up from my ribs. "She didn't even know what month it was," I whispered. "She did," Margaret said. "That day, she did." I looked at her, really looked, and saw not just a sister, but a stranger wearing my mother's perfume. The same perfume I'd dabbed on a cloth to help Mom remember who she was. The same perfume Margaret hadn't worn in 15 years, until now. "You coached her through it, didn't you?" My voice was steadier than I expected. "Sat her down. Pointed where to sign. Used the same tone you use with hotel clerks and waiters." Margaret didn't respond. She didn't have to. Graham spoke up, as if that explained everything. "Legally, the document's sound. And honestly, it makes the most sense. You don't have the bandwidth to manage a property this size. And with Margaret's business background. She visited 4 times in 3 years," I snapped. "I changed her diapers." "Don't make this ugly," Margaret said softly, with that tilt of her head that always meant, "You're embarrassing yourself. This is what Mom wanted. You can't change it now." The lawyer cleared his throat again, his eyes on the table. "I can confirm, the signature matches prior documents. There's no indication of duress." "No indication," I repeated, stunned. She was barely lucid that month. You know what she was saying the day before Easter? She asked me if our goldfish needed to be picked up from kindergarten. Margaret's face twitched, just for a second. Then she smoothed it away. "I'm sorry you're upset," she said. "But this was hard for me, too." Hard for her. "I sold my car to pay the electric bill," I whispered. She blinked. "You never told me that. You never asked." The rest of the meeting blurred. Signatures. Stamps. The real estate agent chatting about staging potential. Graham checking his phone. Margaret nodding graciously, as if receiving some hard-earned reward. I left without saying goodbye. The drive home was a blur of gray sky and red brake lights. I don't remember turning off the ignition. I only remember sitting in the driveway of the house I no longer owned, staring at the porch light I'd fixed the night after Mom passed. There was a time I would have cried. Would have begged. Would have written letters and tried to reason with her. But that part of me had been worn down, year by year, diaper by diaper. Instead, I walked inside. The air smelled like lavender and lemon, the scent of the diffuser I'd refilled each week because it made Mom smile. I opened the hall closet and pulled out a worn cardboard box labeled Christmas. I took out the angel ornament Margaret had made in the 3rd grade, the one Mom insisted we hang near the top every year. I set it gently on the counter. Then I reached into the drawer where I kept my journal. I opened to a blank page. At the top, I wrote, she thinks I'll walk away. Underneath, I wrote, she thinks this ends here. Then I wrote, she has no idea. The next morning, I woke up in a house that no longer belonged to me. It was the same sunlight through the same gauzy curtains, the same creak in the floorboard near the foot of the bed, the same slight chill that meant the heater hadn't kicked on yet. But it felt different. Hollow. Like waking up inside someone else's story. I lay there for a long time, staring at the ceiling fan. It spun slowly, a mechanical echo of time passing, always passing. I thought about the will. About Margaret's calm, careful voice. About the way the lawyer's eyes had slid past me like I wasn't even there. I didn't get up right away. The truth is, I didn't have anywhere to go. No job to return to. No apartment waiting. No partner. No children who might call or care or ask how I was doing. Just me. And a house that had already started slipping through my fingers. Later, I sat in the kitchen, my kitchen, nursing a cup of lukewarm coffee that tasted more like resignation than caffeine. The silence pressed in around me. Not the peaceful kind. The kind that hums too loud in your ears, reminding you that no one is coming. I opened the fridge and stared at its contents, a few leftover casseroles from the funeral, a half-used bottle of creamer, a jar of peach preserves I'd made with Mom last summer, the last time she was lucid enough to remember how. I closed the door. My hands felt too heavy. I wandered from room to room, each one clinging to memories like dust on baseboards. The living room where Mom used to hum while folding laundry. The hallway where I'd caught her dancing to the radio one morning before breakfast. The bathroom where I'd bathed her the night she forgot what water was. In the hallway, I stopped in front of the mirror. I looked older than I remembered. Not old, exactly, just worn. My hair had more gray than the last time I'd really noticed. My eyes looked tired, like they belonged to someone who'd been squinting into the dark too long, hoping to see something good coming. I whispered, "What now?" The mirror didn't answer. That evening, I cooked a small dinner out of habit, roasted vegetables and rice. I made a plate for Mom before I remembered she was gone. I stared at the second plate for a long time before scraping it back into the pot. I didn't eat. I went to bed early but couldn't sleep. Grief has a way of shape-shifting. At first, it came as sadness, heavy and wet, like a soaked blanket I couldn't pull off. Then it became doubt. Had I misunderstood? Misremembered? Did Margaret really believe she was doing the right thing? But by the third day, the grief settled into something quieter, something more familiar. A hollowing. I stopped answering my phone. Margaret texted once, just a single line, "Let me know when you're ready to talk about logistics." Logistics. She meant packing. Leaving. Transferring keys. I stared at the message for a long time, then turned my phone off. I walked through the garden that afternoon, the one I'd revived from a patch of weeds when Mom was first diagnosed. I'd planted lilies by the fence because they reminded her of her wedding bouquet. Marigolds near the porch, because she said the color made her feel sunny inside. Everything was overgrown now. A little wild. A little tired. Like me. I knelt beside the lilies and pulled a few weeds with bare hands. The soil was still soft. I remembered the day we planted them, how Mom had worn her sun hat even though it was cloudy, how she'd asked me, halfway through, if her mother would like them. Her mother had been gone for 40 years. I had smiled anyway and said, she'd love them. Now, my hands were dirty, my knees sore, and the house, our house, was no longer mine. I sat on the back step until the sun dipped low enough to make the air cold. I didn't cry. Not that day. Not yet. I just sat. That night, I opened the closet where I kept Mom's old letters, yellowing envelopes bound by a faded pink ribbon. I read through them slowly, her handwriting steady in the early ones, slanted and hesitant in the later ones. Notes to her mother. Grocery lists. A recipe for shortbread she wanted to perfect before the holidays. In one, dated 5 years ago, she'd written, "I worry about the girls. Margaret's always chasing something shiny. And Ellie, she gives and gives. I hope she knows she doesn't have to fix everything." My throat tightened. I folded the letter back gently and sat with it on my lap. Mom had seen me. Even when I thought I was invisible, even when she didn't say it, she saw. I went to bed that night holding the letter like a prayer. I remember because the mail came late, and the woman who walks her dog past our house every morning waved a little longer than usual. The sky was a dull gray, the kind of sky that doesn't promise rain, just a long, cold wait. I hadn't left the house in 4 days. Not out of bitterness, at least not only that. It was more like I was holding my breath. Waiting for some sign. A whisper of reason. A late apology. Anything. But Margaret's silence said everything. I opened the front door and saw the envelope on the mat. Plain white. No return address. My name handwritten in careful script. Inside, a copy of a transfer form. Official letterhead. Her signature already printed at the bottom. A sticky note affixed to the corner, "Whenever you're ready. M." No, love. No, sorry. Just the assumption that I would fall in line. That's what broke the stasis. Not the document. The handwriting. She'd signed it, M. She used to sign birthday cards with little doodles, hearts, stars, swirls. She used to write, "Margaret the Great," on school notebooks. She used to draw curly flowers in the margins of her letters home from college. Now, it was just an initial. Like I was a vendor. Or a tenant. I folded the paper back into the envelope and set it on the counter. Then I went to the hall closet and took down a box I hadn't touched in years. Inside, my old notebooks from the job I'd left behind. Budgets, timelines, grant proposals. Pages of notes on project management and donor reporting. All the things I once did for a living before I traded meetings and deadlines for bath chairs and pill organizers. I ran my fingers over the paper, surprised by the steadiness in my chest. That night, I opened my laptop and searched for Mom's original attorney, the one we trusted before Margaret had found someone faster and more efficient. Mr. Leland had retired, but his daughter, a woman named Abigail, had taken over his practice. I made an appointment. Told her I wanted to review an inheritance issue. "Bring anything you think will help," she said. I brought everything. The next day, I sat across from Abigail Leland in a warm office lined with books that looked read, not just displayed. She listened as I told her everything. I didn't dramatize. I didn't cry. I just laid it out. The years of care. The change in the will. The timing. The diagnosis. She asked questions carefully, like she wasn't just building a case, she was assembling a puzzle. When I showed her a copy of the will, her eyes narrowed. "Signed during a known cognitive decline," she said quietly. "And witnessed by a real estate agent and his assistant." I nodded. She turned the page slowly. "If this were to be challenged, we'd have a strong basis. Especially given your mother's medical records and the timing of the diagnosis." "But I don't want to fight her," I said. She looked up. "I don't want a courtroom. I don't want a battle. I just want her to know, she didn't win." "Not really." Abigail tilted her head. "Then what are you looking for?" I exhaled. It was the first time I'd put it into words. "I want my mother's story to be told properly. I want the record to reflect the truth, who stood by her, and who walked away. I want my name back in the narrative." Abigail nodded once. "Then we build quietly. Paperwork. Documentation. The truth. And we move at your pace." That was the moment. Not when I first sat down in her office. Not even when she confirmed what I already knew, that the will could be challenged. It was when she said, "We move at your pace." Because for the first time in a long time, I had one. That night, I started making lists. Not frantic or angry. Calm. Methodical. Gather receipts, groceries, pharmacy runs, in-home nurse payments. Compile letters, mom's notes, texts from neighbors. Document, medical history timeline. And then, a separate page. What I will keep. 1. The garden gloves with mom's initials. 2. The peach preserves. 3. The angel ornament. 4. The photo of her hugging me at graduation, the last time she said she was proud out loud. 5. My dignity. I slept well that night. Not because anything had been fixed. But because something inside me had finally said, enough. The next morning, I started moving through the house with a different energy. I wasn't rushing to leave anymore. I was taking inventory. Margaret had taken the deed. But not the soul. She didn't know about the bank accounts I'd managed during Mom's decline. The ones where I'd deposited small reimbursements from her pension. The ones still in my name, untouched. She didn't know about the journals. Or the voice memos Mom had left on the old phone I kept in the drawer. The one I hadn't thrown away, because I couldn't bear to delete the sound of her voice. I began to copy those files. Abigail would know what to do with them later. I wasn't plotting revenge. I was setting the record straight. Not in Margaret's eyes, they were too clouded with entitlement. But in my own. I stopped waiting for her to show regret. She never would. But I had started to remember who I was before the caregiving, before the resignation. And I wasn't done yet. The first thing I did was transfer the funds. There wasn't much, about $8,300 in an account I'd opened in Mom's name 3 years earlier, when her pension check stopped coming in on time and I had to cover the gap with my savings. Each reimbursement I deposited felt like patching a sinking boat with dollar store tape. But I never touched it. Not once. Now, I moved the money into a personal trust in my name. Legally, those funds were mine. I had the records, the withdrawals, the receipts. Grocery bills from 2019 with my debit card number. The nurse invoices I'd paid out of pocket. Margaret never even asked what things cost. She assumed everything was automatic, taken care of. It was. By me. Then I called the storage unit on Dorsey Avenue. The one I'd rented to store most of Mom's keepsakes, not because they weren't important, but because Margaret wanted the house clean for showings. The day after the will reading, she'd texted a list of things she thought should be cleared out quickly. Among them, photo albums, Dad's medals, Mom's wedding dress, and the box labeled Ellie's childhood. I paid 6 months in advance on the unit. Then I changed the access code. After that, I visited the community center, the one where Mom used to volunteer every Saturday before her memory began slipping. There, tucked between a ceramic studio and a room full of donated coats, was a small library dedicated to caregivers. I asked if they needed help sorting their materials. They said yes. For 2 weeks, I came in quietly, just a few hours each afternoon. Organizing binders. Reshelving books. One day, the director asked if I'd be interested in sharing my story. They were starting a program to support women caring for aging parents, especially those who had left careers to do so. I said I'd think about it. Then I went home and started writing. Not a tell-all. Not even an essay about Margaret. It was about Mom. About what it meant to watch someone disappear in pieces. About feeding her mashed potatoes with a baby spoon, about dancing with her in the kitchen when she didn't recognize me but still remembered the words to "stand by me." I submitted it anonymously. 3 weeks later, they published it in their newsletter. I watched as neighbors stopped me at the grocery store, at the post office, outside the church we used to attend together. People who hadn't known the full story. People who had seen me only as the daughter who stayed but never knew what staying looked like. Margaret never mentioned the article. But I know she read it. How? Because 2 days after it was published, she called. The first time since the will reading. I let it go to voicemail. She didn't leave a message. Instead, she emailed. The subject line was, "Just checking in. Inside, hope you're doing okay. The agent says the market's softening, so we may want to list sooner rather than later. Let's connect this week to talk next steps." Next steps. I replied the next day. Thanks for the update. I'm currently working with legal counsel regarding the transfer of property. I'll let you know when they advise me to proceed. Kindly direct any questions to Abigail Leland's office. All future communications will be documented. I attached the attorney's contact information. I signed it with my full name, Eleanor May Bishop. No, Ellie. No, love. No, M. That was the last time she reached out. In the weeks that followed, I watched from a quiet distance as her plans slowly unraveled, not with explosions, but with unanswered questions. The lawyer's office sent formal inquiries about the will's legitimacy. They asked for medical documentation to support the timing of the signature. They requested statements from the witnesses. Abigail didn't make threats. She just made things inconvenient. Margaret hated inconvenience. Then there was the article. A small local paper ran a follow-up piece on elder care, citing the community center's caregiver program. My essay was quoted. Anonymously again, but with a new title added by the editor. The Forgotten Daughter. It started to circulate. At the bakery. At the hair salon. At the church where Mom once led the holiday choir. People talked. And Margaret hated when people talked. She stopped coming to town. Her agent started showing the house without her. I watched from my bedroom window one afternoon as a young couple toured the porch I had painted last summer. They smiled. They looked at the marigolds by the stairs. The ones I'd planted. That night, I made one more list. This one I didn't keep in a drawer. I wrote it on a note card and placed it under Mom's favorite mug, the one with the cracked handle and the faint outline of a daisy. Things Margaret will never take from me. 1. The nights I held her hand. 2. The way Mom smiled when I sang old songs off-key. 3. The softness in her eyes the last time she said my name. 4. The truth. And one final line. 5. Myself. It started with the showing that didn't happen. The house was scheduled for an open tour on a Saturday afternoon. The real estate agent, a polite, overworked woman named Carla, had texted me the time. I responded promptly, copying my attorney's address and asking her to confirm whether she had the authority to market a home that was currently under legal dispute. She didn't reply. 3 hours later, the "for sale" sign disappeared from the yard. 2 days after that, a different sign appeared, this one small, discreet, planted near the front walkway, by appointment only. Margaret didn't mention it. But I knew she'd noticed. Her silence was louder now. Heavier. Each day without contact felt like another layer of her certainty slipping away. The kind of silence that comes not from indifference, but from discomfort. From not knowing what the next move should be. I went back to the community center and started teaching a workshop, When Caregivers Vanish, Advocating for Yourself When the Family Picture Breaks. 27 people signed up. 27 people who had also sat at long, shiny tables and heard their names omitted. 27 who understood that betrayal doesn't always shout, sometimes it signs a form and smiles politely. I never said Margaret's name. I never had to. Everyone there had their own version of her. One morning, Carla, the agent, called me directly. Her tone was polite but strained. We've had some concerns from potential buyers about the title status. I was wondering if you could provide clarity. I asked her to direct all inquiries to my attorney. She sighed. I figured you'd say that. Then, almost quietly, she added, you know, I've worked with families in probate cases before. Usually there's some bitterness. But this feels different. Like something went really wrong. I didn't respond. She said, I hope you're okay. I was. More okay than I had been in months. Margaret, though, not so much. The community center newsletter with my essay had made the rounds again, this time picked up by a local advocacy group. They asked to republish it on their website. I agreed, under the same condition, anonymous. But this time, they asked if I'd be willing to do a Q&A, voice only, for their podcast series on invisible labor. I said yes. 2 weeks later, my voice, soft but firm, told a quiet room full of strangers what it felt like to trade your 30s for a hospital chair. To become a nurse with no training, a maid with no days off, a daughter turned invisible. The episode was shared more than I expected. Someone emailed to say they'd cried listening to it on their commute. Another said it helped them understand their sister's silence after their father's death. A third, this one from a woman in town, simply wrote, I know exactly who you are. Thank you for telling the truth. 3 days later, Margaret's LinkedIn page disappeared. Graham's too. I never said anything about them publicly. Never wrote a blog post. Never gave a name. But the town was small, and people weren't stupid. They remembered who was absent during Mom's decline. Who left early from the funeral. Who started renovations before the body was cold. Margaret had always thrived in perception. Polished. Articulate. The kind of woman who knew which fork to use and which charity event to attend. Now, her reputation, the thing she clung to even tighter than the house, was faltering. A friend from high school texted me late one evening. I ran into Margaret at the farmer's market. She looked tired. Told me she was considering selling the Boulder condo. Said things have been difficult since Mom passed. I didn't say anything. But I wanted to. I replied, thanks for not defending her. She responded, she never defended you. That was the difference. People were no longer smiling through the lies. One morning, I got a formal letter from Graham's firm. Something about seeking mediation instead of litigation. To avoid unnecessary reputational damage. The word reputation sat underlined in red. I handed it to Abigail, who raised an eyebrow. They're not worried about fairness, she said. They're worried about exposure. Let them worry, I said. 2 days later, the letter was retracted. No follow-up. The sale of the house stalled. Word got around that there was a dispute. Buyers hesitated. Appraisers asked more questions. And every time Margaret tried to simplify the story, someone, somewhere, had already heard another version. My version. The one rooted not in revenge, but in truth. She couldn't explain that away. And I never had to say a word to her face. That was the power of quiet resistance. No shouting. No public battles. Just facts. Just time. And the echo of her own choices closing in like a tide she thought she could control. It happened, as many important things do, not on some dramatic stage, but over a table with lukewarm tea and polite silence. Margaret requested the meeting through Abigail. She didn't call, didn't text. Just a formal request for a conversation. She asked that it be private, between sisters. I agreed, under one condition, it would happen at the house. Not a restaurant. Not a conference room. At 47, Hawthorne Lane, the place she tried to take with a whisper and a signature. She hesitated, then relented. I was already there when she arrived, 30 minutes late. She stepped through the door like it belonged to her, then paused as the scent of lemon oil and late summer roses wrapped around her. I'd cleaned the floors that morning. Not for her, for myself. Because I wanted the space to remember who it had belonged to. She wore expensive sunglasses and a coat I recognized from a trip to Paris 5 years ago. Her heels clicked softly across the tile as she walked into the living room. I didn't rise from the armchair. I watched her lower herself onto the couch across from me, smoothing her skirt like the meeting might be documented for public record. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," she said. I waited. She glanced around the room. Her eyes landed on the mantel, where Mom's photo rested beside the daisy-handled mug. "I didn't think you'd stay here this long," she said, lightly. "You always said you didn't want to get stuck in this house." "That was before," I said. She nodded, as if that meant something. Then she folded her hands and began. "I didn't handle everything well. I see that now. I was overwhelmed after Mom passed, and I let Graham take the lead on some things. I should have." She stopped. "You're right. You did the work. You were there. Every day. And I wasn't. I studied her. It wasn't a performance. Not quite. But it wasn't entirely clean, either. She was trying. But not just to apologize. She was trying to recover ground. I didn't ask for recognition," I said. "I know." She took off her sunglasses and set them on the coffee table. Her eyes were red around the rims. "People talk," she said quietly. "That article. The podcast. The rumors in town." I raised an eyebrow. She didn't flinch. "They're saying I manipulated Mom. That I took the house. That I wrote you out." I let the silence fill the room. Because she was right. "That's not what happened," she said. "Not how I remember it. That's because you weren't here." The words were soft, but they hit harder than any accusation I'd ever hurled. Margaret blinked. "You saw snapshots. I saw the story. You were here for highlights. I stayed for the closing credits." She looked down. "I just want to fix things," she said, her voice smaller. "I want us to be okay." It took everything in me not to laugh, not because it was funny, but because of how deeply she misunderstood what had happened. This wasn't a rift between siblings over misunderstandings. It was a betrayal of presence. "You can't fix what you never built," I said. "You forfeited something when you rewrote Mom's ending without me. And I'm not interested in patching over that with brunch and apologies." Her eyes shone now. But no tears fell. "I miss you," she said. I looked past her, to the bay window that Mom loved, where the sun now fell in thick, golden slants across the wooden floor. "I miss who you used to be," I said. "Before all this. When we were kids, and you used to sneak me crackers during storms. When you protected me from Dad's bad moods. When you let me sleep in your bed after I broke my arm." She closed her eyes. "I'm not angry anymore," I added. "I'm tired. And I'm done." Margaret opened her mouth, but I held up a hand. "This isn't a negotiation. I don't want a portion. I don't want a compromise. And I don't want your name on anything tied to Mom." She stiffened. "You can keep the will," I continued. "It'll stay under review for as long as it needs to. In the meantime, the house doesn't get sold. Nothing gets listed. And you don't get to act like nothing happened." "What do you want, then?" she asked, voice thin. I stood, slowly, letting the quiet stretch. "I want peace," I said. "Not with you. With myself." Margaret rose, too, but didn't reach for her things. "You know," she said, not unkindly, "you always surprised me. You were never loud, never bold. But when you decide something, really decide, it's like the whole world has to adjust around it." I didn't reply. We stood there, two women shaped by the same roof but sculpted by different storms. After a beat, she nodded. And left. She didn't slam the door. Didn't hurl final words. She just disappeared down the path. I waited until I heard her car turn the corner, then walked into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. The house was still. Not empty. Just quiet. Like it had been waiting for that final chapter to close. Peace didn't arrive all at once. It didn't come in a single breath, or a sudden sunrise, or the absence of Margaret's voice. It came in fragments, quiet moments stitched together across days, like quilt squares passed down by women who knew grief but chose to keep sewing. It came in the sound of the front door unlocking and no longer wondering who might be on the other side. In the way the house no longer held its breath. The legal review continued, but I let Abigail handle that. I gave her everything, records, journals, receipts, and then I stepped away. I stopped waiting for updates. I stopped checking for emails. I didn't need the outcome to be mine, because the story already was. I planted new marigolds that spring. Not because the old ones had died, they hadn't, but because Mom had once told me they kept pests away and joy close. I liked the idea that something bright and golden could both protect and attract. I bought the seeds in small brown envelopes and spread them gently across the soil with my hands, no gloves this time. I let the dirt cling to my skin. Inside, I started moving things back in. Not furniture, that had always stayed, but meaning. The dining room became a space for writing. I moved Mom's old typewriter to the corner and added a soft blue chair I'd found at a thrift store downtown. I kept her mug on the desk, not as a shrine, but as a reminder that I came from a woman who always finished her tea, even when it had gone cold. I cooked again. Not just out of habit, but with curiosity. I tried her shortbread recipe, the one she'd scribbled in the margins of a church bulletin. It was too dry the first time, too sweet the second. The third time, I got it right, not perfect, but right. I shared it with the neighbors. One of them said it reminded her of her grandmother. That made me smile. I walked more. I joined a book club. I let a neighbor teach me how to prune roses without destroying the roots. I laughed, once, a real laugh, when I tripped on the garden hose and fell into the flower bed. I looked ridiculous, covered in mud, and couldn't stop smiling. Mom would have said, well, the lilies will appreciate the company. I started sleeping with the windows open again. Letting the night air in. Letting the house breathe. I framed one of Mom's notes, the one where she wrote, "Remember who you are when no one is watching." I placed it above the hallway light switch, so I'd see it every morning and every night. It grounded me. The silence, once suffocating, softened. It became something else, not a void, but a presence. A gentle one. A house no longer echoing with betrayal, but humming with restoration. And Margaret? She didn't come back. She sent one more letter, this one typed and formal. It said she would no longer contest the decision to freeze the estate. That she understood my position. That she hoped one day we could remember the good times. I didn't respond. Because I already had, just not to her. I'd responded by staying. By reclaiming. By remembering on my own terms. Some evenings, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea and a book I wasn't really reading. Just listening. To the trees. To the birds. To the faint tick of the wind chime above the door. I thought about legacy. Not in the grand, sprawling sense, not wealth or recognition, but in the way a garden keeps blooming long after the gardener is gone. In the way recipes outlive voices. In the way presence becomes memory. Mom was everywhere. Not haunting. Just folded into the fabric of the home. I found peace not by forgetting Margaret's betrayal, but by making it irrelevant. By planting something deeper in its place. I made a list one morning, the last one I would ever need. Things I am now. 1. A daughter, still. 2. A woman who stayed. 3. A woman who left the bitterness behind. 4. A woman who turned the page. 5. A woman who wrote her own ending. And beneath that, just 2 words. Still standing. I walked through the garden at dusk, barefoot on soil I had turned myself. The marigolds caught the last of the light, little suns pressed low into the earth, and the air smelled like green things waking up. Inside, the kettle began to whistle, soft and steady, not urgent. I didn't rush. I stood there, hands in my pockets, the quiet weight of belonging settling gently into my bones. I thought about how much I had given. How much had been taken. And how, in the end, what mattered most was not who signed the deed, or who claimed the walls, but who remained when everything else fell away. I stayed. I remembered. I healed. And now, when I pass the hallway mirror, I see a woman who did not vanish. I see someone who was nearly erased, and rewrote herself in ink. The house is still here. But more importantly, so am I. And some days, when the wind moves just right through the garden, I swear I can hear my mother laughing, soft and far away, as if to say, "You remembered how to bloom."